Cop mocks black woman in court. Then she flashes her Supreme Court justice badge. They say fate has a wicked sense of humor, especially when pride and prejudice collide in the most unexpected places. In a small courtroom, where routine cases typically pass unnoticed, an arrogant police officer with a hidden agenda confronts a poised black woman. He assumes she's an easy target for mockery, belittling her very presence. But within the tension-laced air, the tables turn. In a heartbeat, suddenly, a simple flash of credentials reveals a shocking truth. This unassuming woman holds power and status that not even the most brazen bigot can ignore. What follows is a roller coaster of drama, retribution, and revelations no one saw coming. The morning sun had barely dragged itself above the horizon when Officer Harold Harry Slate sauntered out of the local diner, a half-eaten donut in one hand and a large paper cup of black coffee in the other. Those who frequented Mike's diner at dawn had grown accustomed to Harry's presence. He made it his business to patrol the area, looking for any sign of trouble, though, in truth, trouble was a word he often substituted for anyone who didn't fit his personal mold of acceptable. Harry had been a police officer in Slatebridge for nearly 2 decades. It was a modest town south of Richmond, Virginia, steeped in old traditions, some admirable and others deeply problematic. Though it prided itself on Southern hospitality, Slatebridge wasn't immune to the undercurrents of racism, tension, and distrust that could run through any community. Harry, a stout man with a buzz cut and cold gray eyes, wore his uniform like an armor of entitlement rather than a badge of service. As Harry made his way to his police cruiser, he greeted a few townsfolk with curt nods, ignoring anyone he believed didn't deserve his acknowledgement. He'd always had a personal vendetta against anyone he perceived as stupid, people who, in his words, didn't know their place. Unfortunately, in Harry's worldview, their place often equated to being subservient if they happened to be a person of color. He hopped into his cruiser, flicked on the radio, and waited for any sign of a dispatch call. As luck, or misfortune, would have it, he soon got word of a routine traffic stop that had escalated. A woman had refused to sign a ticket, thereby requiring an appearance at the local municipal court that very morning. Harry recognized the name, Isabella Bowman, just another outsider who had moved to Slatebridge recently, as far as he was concerned. He'd never met her, but that wouldn't stop him from presuming the worst. At precisely 9 a.m., Harry pulled up at the courthouse, parking his cruiser in the spot reserved for law enforcement only. The Slatebridge Municipal Court was a small building with chipped paint and aging columns out front. A large brass plaque by the entrance read, "Dedicated to equal justice for all," though in Harry's mind, the word all was selectively applied. Inside the main hallway, a handful of lawyers, defendants, and family members milled about, waiting for their turn before the judge. Harry's presence made people shift uncomfortably. Some recognized him and knew his reputation. Others simply noticed the icy stare he radiated. In a corner, near a long bench, stood Isabella Bowman. She was dressed in a simple black blazer and matching skirt. Her posture was regal, yet she maintained an unassuming air about her. She clutched a leather portfolio under her arm, her face calm despite the hustle around her. Whenever she moved, there was an elegance in her steps, as though the scuffed courthouse floors were marble paths in a grand estate. Harry eyed her from across the hall. Something about her composure rubbed him the wrong way. He was used to people looking tense, worried, or defensive in these halls, especially if they were here to face the local judge, but this woman exuded a quiet confidence. Instantly, Harry's guard went up. He approached, leaning in to speak to her in a low, authoritative voice. "You Isabella Bowman?" he asked, never wanting to introduce himself properly. Isabella turned slightly, met his gaze, and nodded. "I am." His lips twisted into a sneer. "I hear you caused quite the ruckus earlier, refusing to sign a traffic ticket. That sort of behavior might fly in big cities, but Slatebridge don't take kindly to folks thinking they can ignore our laws." Isabella's expression remained pleasant, though there was a flicker of something guarded in her eyes. "I wasn't refusing to sign," she corrected. "I wanted time to read it carefully because it seemed incorrectly issued." The officer took offense. Harry chuckled without humor. "That's your story. Let's see how it holds up. You're up next, Miss Bowman." He gestured for her to walk ahead of him into the courtroom. She obliged, moving with the same quiet self-assurance that had first caught his attention. Harry followed closely, his fingertips grazing his belt where his handcuffs and firearm rested. He reminded himself he was in control here. This was his territory. As they stepped into the small courtroom, the wooden pew-like benches were nearly half full. At the front, presiding, was Judge Sarah Kyle, a local fixture with a firm but fair reputation. He glanced up at the pair entering, gave them a curt nod, and signaled for Isabella's case to proceed. The court clerk read the charges: failure to comply with a traffic stop, refusing to sign a citation, and obstruction of an officer, a ridiculous trifecta in Isabella's opinion, all stemming from that single moment of her asking for clarity. But she maintained composure, offering no outward reaction. Harry, emboldened by the official recitation of the charges, stood to one side. He offered his version of events to Judge Kyle, painting a dramatic picture of a woman belligerently challenging the authority of a sworn officer. According to Harry, Isabella's calm request to read the ticket had turned into an outright refusal and confrontation. His exaggerations hung thick in the air, but he delivered them with a conviction born of years of unchallenged authority. When it was Isabella's turn, she spoke with measured precision. "Your Honor, the officer who stopped me insisted I sign a citation for speeding in a school zone. I asked him to show me the posted signs or any proof that I was indeed speeding, given that I was within a 25 miles per hour limit. He refused to show me anything and demanded my signature. When I persisted in asking to see the evidence, he threatened me with arrest. I merely wanted clarity before admitting fault." Judge Kyle tapped a pencil on his bench. "That's quite the discrepancy. Officer Slate, you're saying Miss Bowman was obstructing an officer in the line of duty, while she claims she simply wanted clarity. Do we have dashcam footage?" Harry shifted uncomfortably. "The dash cam malfunctioned." He paused. "No usable footage." A faint smile flickered across Isabella's face, barely perceptible. That malfunction seemed all too convenient. Harry's story was unraveling under the mildest scrutiny, yet Slatebridge was the kind of place where the word of a local officer often carried more weight than a stranger's. Judge Kyle cleared his throat. "I'm going to set a second hearing date. In the meantime, Miss Bowman, you remain under the purview of this court. Don't leave town without notifying us. Understood?" She nodded. "Understood, Your Honor." A wave of triumph washed across Harry's face as the judge adjourned. He silently reveled in the fact that, while he hadn't secured a conviction, at least this outsider would be stuck in Slatebridge, mired in legal red tape. Isabella tucked a stray lock of hair behind her ear and placed her portfolio on the table to gather her documents. Harry couldn't resist. He ambled closer, an air of smugness radiating off him. "You see, folks who come in here think they can talk circles around the law," he said in a low voice. "Doesn't matter what fancy words you've got. Slatebridge has its own way of doing things. You'll learn that." Isabella regarded him steadily. "I respect the law, Officer Slate, but I also know that respect goes both ways." Harry let out a harsh chuckle. "The day I owe you any respect is the day hell freezes over Mississippi." She said nothing, simply gathered her papers, and walked out of the courtroom, leaving Harry behind, fuming. He was certain she was some kind of trouble, someone who thought she could push back against a system that had worked just fine for him all these years. It never crossed his mind that perhaps she had good reason, or that she might possess a power far beyond his reckoning. Little did Harry Slate realize that Isabella Bowman was accustomed to far bigger courtrooms and far more influential audiences. She had confronted prejudice in forms more insidious and widespread than anything Slatebridge could conjure, and one day, sooner rather than later, he would learn exactly how out of his depth he really was. Leaving the courthouse, Isabella breathed in the crisp morning air and allowed herself a moment of reflection. She glanced back at the aging structure, remembering the judge's admonition not to leave town. A part of her wanted to laugh at the irony. Had anyone known her true standing, they'd be begging her to remain in the courtroom for an autograph rather than restricting her movement as if she were a flight risk. Her car, a modest sedan, was parked at the edge of the small lot. She slipped behind the wheel, set down her leather portfolio, and let her gaze travel to the local shops that lined the main street. On the surface, Slatebridge exuded a quaint charm. American flags hung from lampposts, flower baskets swayed in the breeze, and families strolled along the sidewalk. Yet beneath that veneer was a tension she recognized all too well. Isabella was no stranger to prejudice or small-minded hostility. She had come a long way from her early days in a struggling neighborhood of Chicago. Her journey had wound through prestigious universities, law schools, clerkships, and eventually, the most coveted chambers in the land, the Supreme Court of the United States. Yes, she was not merely an attorney or a judge. She was a Supreme Court justice, appointed 2 years prior, a historical appointment that many lauded as progress. But she had requested a rare sabbatical, her first extended private leave, to handle personal matters. For reasons only a few in her inner circle understood, this sabbatical was supposed to be spent quietly, with minimal recognition or fanfare, allowing her time and space for introspection and a chance to handle some family business. She was incognito, no security detail, no fanfare, no staff. Because of the confidentiality behind her personal reason for being in Slatebridge, she had let her guard down. She believed that a place like this could offer her anonymity. She hadn't anticipated an overzealous local officer would twist a minor traffic stop into an ordeal. Rather than explode with anger, Isabella channeled her frustration into determination. There was something bigger here. She could sense it. The locals spoke of a system that felt rigged, with Harry Slate as a central figure, always ready to harass newcomers or stir up trouble under the guise of law enforcement. She resolved to see this through, to stand up not just for herself, but for the principle of justice. Meanwhile, Harry Slate pulled out of the courthouse parking lot, a smug smile plastered on his face. The small victory of tying Isabella up in legal knots made his day. He had noticed how she carried herself, with an air of superiority, and decided he would enjoy knocking her down a peg or two. Harry drove straight to his usual haunt, a dingy bar on the outskirts of town called Rusty's. Even though it was barely noon, he wanted to brag about his morning to the handful of regulars who nursed beers at that hour. As he pushed open the door, a stale smell of liquor and cigarette smoke enveloped him. A few heads turned. Some greeted him with half-hearted nods, acknowledging the officer's presence as if it were an unwelcome formality. At a far table sat his friend, Deputy Kirk Walton, who was thumbing through a local newspaper. Kirk wasn't exactly Harry's mirror image. He had moments of doubt and quiet regrets about some of their methods, but he usually went along, too timid to speak out against a senior officer. Harry took a seat opposite Kirk, stretching out his legs and lighting a cigarette, ignoring the no smoking sign. Guess who just put a stuck-up city girl in her place? Harry announced, exhaling smoke. Kirk looked up, weariness in his brown eyes. Slate, what did you do this time? Harry recounted the morning's events with embellished bravado, how he'd made sure the judge saw Isabella Bowman as a troublemaker, how she was forced to remain in Slatebridge. He left out the part where the judge had seemed unimpressed with the lack of dashcam footage. Instead, Harry spun it, as if he'd single-handedly kept an arrogant outsider from weaseling out of a ticket. Kirk listened silently, neither cheering nor offering condemnation. Deep down, a part of him squirmed. He knew that Slatebridge's system often nudged them to uphold questionable arrests. With Harry at the helm, those arrests frequently targeted black residents or newcomers. But Kirk lacked the courage to stand up to Harry. He simply didn't want trouble or to lose his job. Eventually, Harry finished his boastful recap. She's not going anywhere soon, he said with a satisfied grin, and I plan to keep an eye on her. Kirk sat down the newspaper. I just hope you're not biting off more than you can chew. Folks who stand that tall usually got something behind them. Harry scoffed. Trust me, Kirk, I've seen her type before. Fancy education, big words, thinking they can run circles around us. She's got nothing on me. Sure, Kirk said quietly, whatever you say. Harry crushed his cigarette in an ashtray, stood up, and left the bar with an air of self-importance. Kirk watched him go, a pit of worry forming in his stomach. There were lines that shouldn't be crossed, and Harry seemed determined to bulldoze right over them. Back in her car, Isabella drove to a small bed and breakfast on the outskirts of Slatebridge named the Willow Inn. It was a charming place run by an elderly couple, Arthur and Betty Moore, who treated her with warmth from the moment she walked through the door. If they recognized her from the news, they kept it to themselves. She had booked a room under her birth name, Isabella Miles, keeping her more public identity under wraps. The inn overlooked a slow-moving creek, and willow trees lined the property. Isabella found the atmosphere serene. She checked in, politely declining offers of assistance with her luggage. Once inside her room, she placed her portfolio on a small writing desk and opened it. Nestled among her papers and personal documents was a small velvet pouch. She delicately removed it, revealing a polished badge that read Associate Justice, Supreme Court of the United States. A pang of conflicting emotions coursed through her. That badge was a testament to everything she had worked for, the years of study, the battles against institutional barriers, the countless sleepless nights. Yet, she sometimes felt the pressure of being a first or only weighed on her more heavily than she cared to admit. Since her appointment, the media had made her a symbol, a figurehead. She was proud to hold such an office, but the relentless spotlight could become stifling. She gazed out the window at the magnolia trees, swaying gently in the afternoon breeze. For a moment, she wondered if her late father, a civil rights lawyer who had inspired her career path, was watching over her. She imagined him reminding her of the responsibilities that came with wielding the power to shape laws and precedents. If he had been alive, he would have told her to stand firm in Slate Bridge, not just for herself, but to uphold the principles of fairness and justice. Setting the badge aside, she made a few phone calls. One was to her assistant in Washington, D.C., letting them know she might be out of reach for longer than expected. Another was to a trusted friend at the Department of Justice, subtly asking if they had any insight into Slate Bridge's record on civil rights. She was careful with her words. She didn't want to betray her incognito status, but she made it clear she was interested in the town's policing statistics. She felt certain that Officer Harold Slate wasn't an isolated case of prejudice. Small towns could sometimes be incubators for systemic issues, where local power structures took on a life of their own, unaccountable to outside scrutiny. Isabella had spent much of her career fighting for transparency, believing that the judicial system should serve the people rather than intimidate them. As evening approached, she ventured out to explore the town. She walked past a modest library, a hardware store, and a local bakery that smelled of fresh bread. A few people offered polite smiles, others seemed wary. She stopped by the library to use the public computers, digging into local news archives. She discovered scattered reports of police brutality allegations, all of which seemed to vanish without follow-up stories. She noted a few names, especially that of Harry Slate, who had been cited multiple times in civil complaints that never went to trial. Back at the Willow Inn, Isabella felt the weight of her discovery. She was starting to suspect that what had happened to her was part of a pattern rather than an isolated incident. The question was, could she shine a light on it without blowing her cover? She mulled over the next steps. The judge had scheduled a second hearing, and in Slate Bridge, that could take a couple of weeks. Isabella decided to use the time wisely. If she could collect enough information, real evidence, she might not only clear her own name, but also expose a broken system. She knew the risk. If anyone found out who she truly was, the media would swarm, overshadowing the local issue. The narrative would become about a Supreme Court justice being harassed in a small town rather than the deeper injustices happening there daily. She resolved to keep her identity concealed for as long as possible. If push came to shove, she would reveal it in a manner that did the most good, ensuring that any spotlight on Slate Bridge would force real change. What she didn't know was that Harry Slate was already planning his next move, determined to show that no outsider, no matter how poised, could slip through his fingers. His next move would test Isabella's resolve and bring to light long-buried secrets, unraveling Slate Bridge's serene facade in a way that no one could have anticipated. 2 days later, the morning light streamed through the sheer curtains of Isabella's room at the Willow Inn. She woke early, feeling a renewed sense of purpose. Over breakfast, a hearty plate of scrambled eggs, bacon, and toast, she made small talk with Betty Moore, who shared stories of how quiet Slate Bridge used to be before the new wave of developments. But Isabella's mind was elsewhere. She had an appointment with someone who might help her crack open the system that protected Harry Slate. Through a discreet network of acquaintances, she had gotten the name of a local pastor, Reverend Walter Vance, who was known in nearby communities as a staunch advocate against injustice. Isabella drove to the Faith and Hope Baptist Church, a modest white building with a small steeple. Despite its unassuming exterior, she could feel an undercurrent of warmth and resolve as soon as she stepped inside. Rows of wooden pews led to a simple altar, and the stained glass windows cast flecks of multicolored light onto the worn carpet. Reverend Vance, a tall, middle-aged man with a salt and pepper beard, welcomed her in his office. Stacks of books and folders cluttered every surface, evidence of his dual role as spiritual leader and de facto community organizer. His eyes were kind but sharp, hinting that he was not one to be easily fooled. "I'm told you want to discuss systemic issues in Slatebridge," he said, folding his hands atop his desk. "I gather you've already met our Officer Slate." Isabella nodded. "I've had the displeasure. I'm doing some personal research into how things operate here. I'd like to know if there's a pattern of harassment." Reverend Vance leaned back in his chair, sighing. "Pattern? Slatebridge is one big pattern, if you're not on the inside track. Officer Slate has been a thorn in this community's side for years. He's not the only one, but he's the most blatant. Accusations of racism, excessive force, intimidation. They get filed, but then they disappear. And that's when people bother to file at all." Isabella glanced around at the clutter on his desk. "Where do these complaints go?" "Officially, they go to the police department's internal affairs or the county's board of supervisors, depending on the nature of the allegation. Unofficially, they get buried. Too many folks here are afraid to speak up, and the ones who do get bullied into silence." He motioned to a nearby filing cabinet. "I've kept copies of some of the complaints, at least the ones people brought to me. I can share them, but I have to warn you, once you dig this deep, Slatebridge's power players don't like it." Isabella studied his expression. "I understand. I'm willing to take that risk." The Reverend opened a drawer and pulled out a handful of folders. "I don't know your full story, Miss Bowman, but I have a sense you can handle yourself. Just promise me that if you uncover something, you'll help more than just yourself." She nodded solemnly. "I promise." He handed her the folders, which contained startling stories. A young black man beaten during a traffic stop, a Hispanic family intimidated into abandoning their discrimination claim, a local activist who left town after receiving death threats. Reading through them, Isabella felt anger tighten her chest. This was not just about one officer's bigotry. It was about an entire community's complacency or fear. As she thanked Reverend Vance and left the church, Isabella's mind raced. She knew she had to be methodical. A single exposure might cause a stir, but it could be discredited or overshadowed. To bring about real change, she needed an airtight case, documented evidence, eyewitness accounts, and a strategy to ensure the story wouldn't be buried or manipulated. Unbeknownst to her, Harry Slate was already watching from across the street. He'd parked his cruiser behind a weathered pickup truck and peered through his tinted window. When he saw Isabella emerge from the church, carrying folders, his eyes narrowed. He recognized Reverend Vance as a troublemaker who often butted heads with the local establishment. Harry's anger flared. "You think you can waltz in here, dig up dirt on me, and strut out?" He muttered to himself. He decided he'd need to step up his game. Maybe give her a real taste of what happened to nosy outsiders. Later that evening, Isabella sat at the desk in her room, poring over the files. She took notes, cross-referencing names and dates. She noticed the same handful of officers were repeatedly accused: Harry Slate, a deputy named Frank Buddy Lipton, and a couple of others. The pattern was disturbingly consistent. Routine traffic stops escalating into violence or threats, especially against Black or Latino residents. No dashcam footage to confirm the accounts. Always mysteriously unavailable. Complainants who retracted statements under questionable circumstances. Just as she was finishing a particularly distressing testimony, her phone buzzed. She glanced at the caller ID, an unknown number. Normally, she wouldn't answer, but her gut told her this could be relevant. "Hello." A woman's voice, trembling. "Is this Miss Bowman?" I got your number from Reverend Vance. My name is Tanya Parks." "Yes, Tanya. Are you all right?" A brief pause crackled over the line. I don't know. I'm scared. Officer Slate. He's been harassing me and my fiancée for weeks. We tried complaining, but nobody listens. Pastor Vance said you might help." Isabella's grip on the phone tightened. "I'll do everything I can. Do you need me to come to you?" I don't know. Harry Slate drives by our house late at night, just shining his spotlight in our window. My fiancée wants to fight back, but I'm scared we'll end up arrested, or worse." Isabella inhaled slowly. "First, stay calm, and keep a record of every incident, times, dates, anything that happens. Second, if you feel unsafe right now, call 911. Tanya let out a harsh laugh. "Call 911. They're all in on it. That's the problem." Isabella closed her eyes. This was the reality so many faced. Who do you call for help when those supposed to protect you become the threat? "All right, I understand. Just stay safe, And if something happens, call me anytime, day or night. We'll figure this out. They exchanged a few more words, and Tanya hung up, still trembling. Isabella knew she'd have to meet her soon. First-hand witness accounts, especially recent ones, would be crucial. Yet, she also felt the weight of responsibility. Tanya was frightened, and so was her fiancé. If Harry found out that Tanya was seeking outside help, he might escalate. Isabella had to tread carefully. She placed the phone on the desk, feeling a renewed surge of indignation. On the table beside her were countless stories, testimonies of people who'd been marginalized, oppressed, or simply scared into silence. She had the power to help them, but she also risked blowing her cover or making the situation worse if she moved too rashly. The next morning, Isabella decided to gather physical evidence of any new harassment. She drove past Tanya's house, a modest, single-story home with a small porch. From a distance, she noted the vantage points from which a police cruiser could surveil them. She used her phone camera to document the surroundings, carefully avoiding drawing attention to herself. As she circled back toward the main road, a sudden flash of blue lights filled her rearview mirror. She cursed under her breath. It was a Slatebridge police cruiser. Panic rose momentarily, but she forced herself to stay calm. She pulled over to the side of the road, heart pounding. Sure enough, Harry Slate approached her driver's side window, his face twisted in a condescending smirk. "Afternoon, Miss Bowman. Lost are we?" "No, Officer Slate," she replied coolly. "Is there a problem?" He removed his sunglasses, revealing those cold gray eyes. "You seem to be lingering in parts of town that might be dangerous. You wouldn't want to wind up somewhere you don't belong." Isabella's jaw tightened. "I'm free to drive on public roads. Last I checked." Harry shrugged. "Fair enough, but I've got my eye on you. We don't appreciate strangers poking around, especially ones on probation with the court." She handed him her license and registration, though she knew there was no valid reason to stop her. Harry took his time, pretending to inspect the documents, all the while giving her a predatory stare. Finally, he handed them back. "Drive safe, Miss Bowman." He strolled back to his cruiser, but instead of leaving immediately, he lingered behind her car for a good minute, as though deciding whether to escalate the situation. Eventually, he peeled off, leaving Isabella with her heart thumping. She gripped the steering wheel, cursing herself for letting him unnerve her. In that moment, she knew the situation was rapidly heating up. Harry wasn't going to let her gather information without a fight. He would push her, intimidate her, and, if necessary, frame her for something she didn't do. A quiet voice in her head questioned her incognito approach. Was it time to use her influence and blow this wide open? Over the next week, Isabella worked discreetly, forging tentative alliances with community members who had stories to share. With Reverend Vance acting as a liaison, she began collecting first-hand accounts of police misconduct. She interviewed Tanya Parks and her fiancé, a soft-spoken mechanic named Kevin. They recounted how Harry and Deputy Lipton would tail them, pull them over for minor infractions, and ask invasive questions unrelated to traffic concerns. Isabella diligently jotted down details, dates, times, descriptions of the officers' behavior, and any evidence that might corroborate their claims. Tanya also showed her a collection of text messages from an unknown number, threatening them to keep quiet or face consequences. Though the number was untraceable, Isabella suspected Harry was behind it. Quietly, Isabella also consulted legal statutes. She knew the intricacies of federal civil rights laws that could be leveraged against officers who engaged in patterns of misconduct. Gathering evidence was one thing. Ensuring it stood up in court was another. She needed unimpeachable documentation or credible witness testimony. During this time, Harry's presence loomed like a storm cloud. He made a habit of accidentally bumping into Isabella around town, at the grocery store, the gas station, even the local library. Each encounter was charged with unspoken hostility, a subtle reminder that he was watching. One drizzly afternoon, Isabella returned to the Willow Inn to find a note slipped under her door. It read, "Leave now, or you'll regret it." There was no signature, and the handwriting was blocky, as though the writer was trying to disguise their script. But Isabella suspected the source. She reported the note to Betty Moore, who wore a concerned frown. "Should we call the authorities?" the elderly innkeeper asked gently. Isabella forced a reassuring smile. "I'll take care of it. But if you see anything suspicious, let me know immediately." Betty nodded, clearly worried. "We don't want trouble here, dear." I understand, Isabella said. Trust me, I'm working to fix it so you won't have to worry anymore. Shortly after, her phone rang. It was an unknown number again, but this time, the caller identified herself as Laura Norris, an attorney who represented one of Harry Slate's past victims. She had heard through the grapevine that Isabella was collecting evidence. Laura offered her professional insights, saying she had tried to build a case against Harry a year ago, but lacked the community support to see it through. At first, people were terrified to speak up, Laura explained. When I finally got a few folks to sign affidavits, the pressure on them became unbearable. Anonymous threats, vandalism, job losses. It was a campaign of intimidation. Isabella's jaw tightened. I'm gathering more evidence. If I can compile enough, do you think we could file a federal civil rights lawsuit? Potentially, yes, Laura said. But we'd need the DOJ on our side. Local or state agencies here are compromised. If we take this route, we'd better have mountains of evidence. Officer Slate has friends in high places who'd do anything to protect him and themselves. Isabella ended the call, feeling both encouraged and anxious. Building a case was possible, but the ramifications would be massive. She had to ensure that once the hammer fell, it would fall swiftly and decisively. The next morning, she contacted her friend at the Department of Justice. This time, she was more direct. I need to speak with someone in the Civil Rights Division, off the record, she said. Her friend hesitated. Isabella, what are you into? You're supposed to be on sabbatical. She inhaled deeply. Let's just say my sabbatical took an unexpected turn. I'm close to uncovering a pattern of serious civil rights violations in Slatebridge, Virginia. I need guidance on how to compile the evidence so the DOJ can swiftly intervene. I'll see what I can do, her friend replied. But we have to tread carefully. If word gets out you're involved, it'll make headlines. Isabella closed her eyes, thinking of the potential media frenzy if the public discovered a Supreme Court justice was undercover in a small town. Yet, she also thought about Tanya, Kevin, Reverend Vance, and all the others who had been victimized. Their courage to speak out deserved a champion willing to take risks. That afternoon, she drove to the city of Richmond to meet Laura Norris in person. The meeting took place in a humble law office above a bakery that smelled of sweet pastries. Over the next 2 hours, they hashed out a plan for collecting affidavits, securing eyewitness statements, and potentially involving federal authorities. The bigger question, Laura said, is how we ensure these witnesses stay safe. If Slate or his associates catch wind of this. I have resources, Isabella interjected carefully. I can't explain all of it yet, but trust me when I say that if we do this right, we'll have powerful backing. Once we drop the bombshell, Slatebridge officials won't be able to cover it up. Laura studied Isabella curiously. You speak like someone who's got a big card up her sleeve. Isabella smiled, but it was tinged with sadness. Let's just say I've had experience with high-stakes legal battles. That night, Isabella returned to the Willow Inn, exhausted but resolute. She locked the door to her room and booted up her laptop, drafting a secure memo detailing everything she had discovered so far. She encrypted it, then stored it on a secure server in D.C. If anything happened to her, her colleagues would know where to look. Outside her window, the moon bathed the magnolia trees in a ghostly glow. She sat on the edge of the bed, the Supreme Court badge resting in her hands. She thought of the many times she had invoked the weight of her office in the pursuit of justice.